and a lot of heartbreak for many, many people. It still is. It already is in causing heartbreak. So if you look at the arguments, they're not rational. But is it for Christians to engage in political debate like this on such a complex topic? Maybe we shouldn't even talk about it. Like, people voted, that's it. Let's just do what they said. Well, no, because Christians have a duty to be rational, to think through. Another wonderful saying that I have in Matthew is, somebody asks Jesus, what is the essence of the law? And Jesus sums it up and says, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Now that means with your emotional, your feelings, with your spiritual nature, your soul, but also your intellect. Jesus didn't say, be a, believing Christian, invoke my name, bow the knee, and you'll be saved. If it were only that simple. He said, you've got to think this thing through. You've got to love God with your mind, with your intellect. And Matthew, who was a clever man, heard him say that and wrote it down. So we now have a duty to do the same. We have to think through this Brexit stuff from our emotions, from our spiritual natures, and from our intellectual natures. And as far as I've worked out, from all three domains, it's a complete can of worms. It's a complete disaster. And I'll be sharing why I think that is the case as we proceed. And I think we have to base our arguments on truth, on genuine emotional responses to the crisis we're in. Also, so that's our, if you want, personal experience. Also the personal experiences of many other people who've told me tragedies that they feel. I mean, I have a great fanship for a novelist, Guinevere Glassford, who's written an amazing book called The Words in My Hands, about a love affair between a Dutch woman and Descartes. She's English, she lives in England, and she won prizes for this very good book, which I recommend. It's about how, unbeknownst to scholarship, people have just discovered that Descartes was not all rational. The great founder of I Think, Therefore I Am, also had feelings. And he fell in love with this beautiful Dutch girl, and they had a daughter. She tells the story, the love story. I won't spoil the plot. It has a bittersweet dimension, it's amazing. Now, that blessed woman who's written that book is a very strong Brexit person. She's someone that lives in England, writes internationally, loves France, loves Holland, loves Europe, and is, like me and many, many millions of other people, deeply upset at Brexit. So what we have to do, Descartes is a symbol of this. He loved God so much he wanted to work out and understand the inner structures behind being. He was one of the most important philosophers of his day, and he was sought after by the Queen of Sweden, another European Union member state. So Sweden, Holland, France, were all part of Descartes' world experience. And they're all now part of this European Union. He tried to love the Lord your God with his mind, which we should all be doing. I would argue, therefore, that empirical evidential research is part of the work we have to do. We have to look at all the evidence. Now, I published a book recently, setting up the Centre for Bremain Studies, arguing empirical evidence, why Bremain is much more intelligent than Brexit. I think social scientists, sociologists, if they look at it, will concur. The data is all there. It seems to me the only people that are pushing for Brexit, really, are people that are refusing to look at it either. They're only looking at it through one lens, either just purely emotionally. Most of them seem to be purely emotional. Or a kind of stubborn will, like, I voted leave, let's leave. Or there's a fear and a caution argument that, well, yeah, but lots of people voted leave, so I think we've got to leave, All of them, I think, are false arguments, which it's the duty of Christians and philosophers to engage in debate and outthink them, to think with them. So, you see, I would argue that many Christians have argued with equal force that the European Union project is fundamentally compatible with Christianity, and that the UK's continuing membership of the EU, therefore, is indeed the most logical and rational moral outcome for the future of the UK and the EU. Why? Well, obviously, because it's going to keep the UK together, point number one, a nation state that's been going since 1603, which I'm a citizen of, and I don't want to see broken up, because I know what happens when nation states break up. They become like Yugoslavia or the Soviet Union. People get hurt, they find themselves on different sides of the borders, family gets split, the economy nosedives, and it's a disaster, and often violence breaks out. So I don't even want to even go anywhere near the possibility of the UK breaking up. And the only way to prevent that is to cancel Brexit. There is no other way, because I lived in Scotland. I have dear friends who are Scottish nationalists, most of them. I totally understand where they're coming from, and because I know and love my Scottish colleagues, I know they will do independence for Scotland rather than leave the European Union. They love Europe. I was listening to some tweets by Ian Blackford, the leader of the Scottish Nationalists in the UK Parliament, just today. He's receiving tweets from members of Scotland, Scottish society, Europeans who are now feeling so traumatised by everything. They're leaving Scotland. They've been there living for 10, 20 years happily as Europeans living and working in Scotland. They're having to go home to their countries elsewhere in Europe with a very, very heavy heart. And Ian is desperately saying to them on Twitter, I wish you would stay. We will fight this. We will win. I humbly support what Ian Blackford is doing as leader of the SNP. He's a great man, and he's 100% right in what he's trying to do. But if he fails, if we, the Bremain people, fail, and this psychopath Boris Johnson and his literal psychopath Dominic Cummings and their evil crew get Brexit pushed down the throats, then Scotland will leave. There's no other way to retain its integrity, I think. It will go back to, an independent nation statehood. And of course the Tories will try and prevent it. They'll prevent second referendums. They'll do every trick in the book. They'll probably, as they did with Alex Salmond, they'll find some dark stuff in Nicola Sturgeon's, woodpile, and they'll find all kinds of stuff. You'll see dirty tricks by the intelligence services to try and destroy the SNP, but they won't succeed, because the people of Scotland, people like Craig Murray and so on, have seen through the dirty tricks of the largely English so-called intelligence establishment. It's not intelligence at all. It does Skripal type things which are so fake. You've got to be Father Christmas not to spot them. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but I'm speaking as someone who lived in Scotland, and I believe that what I'm talking about here is the truth, and I have a duty to speak the truth at this critical hour when our country is faced with destruction. And because I'm not a politician, I have I'm free to speak the truth. Ian Blackford, has tried to, and it's deeply disturbing to see what's happening in Scotland. So they will leave. Now, I have some English Brexiteering friends who might say, well, okay, that's their choice. Now we come into the realms of the theatre of the absurd. Why would anyone who's English, and I was brought up in England, I'm culturally English, I have an English accent, my children live in England, I've taught in England for many years, why would the English choose a policy option that will lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom, of which it's part? Does England so little value the United Kingdom? Do we really want to live in a country which kind of reverts to much narrower framework? I don't think Wales is going to stay in the UK either. I think they will eventually be off. If Scotland leave and Northern Ireland leave, Wales is going to follow, and they're already making very strong independence moves. So why would England want to, kind of try and recreate itself as some, I don't know what this fantasy is. So is that a Christian path to do? It's disentangling a kingdom that has been a Christian kingdom, standing for an enlightened and tolerant form of Christianity, in which all different persuasions of Christianity have eventually found voice. Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox. The United Kingdom is a tolerant, liberal country with a Christian monarch, but who is tolerant towards all religions, not just Christianity. And it's been a wonderful experiment in human history. And all cultures and religions flourish. I lived in London, I'm a Londoner. It's a cosmopolitan, wonderful city, and it voted to remain. Brexit is being pushed against its interests. Why do we want to destroy all that? Is it a Christian thing to be doing? That's what I'm asking. Well, I don't read in the Bible that you should do evil and you should cause suffering, and you should choose ignorance over wisdom, and you should choose violence over security, and you should choose despair over hope. I don't read that. That would be a diabolic Bible. That would be, and that's unfortunately what Brexit is doing. So this is why these are some of the arguments why I think that the people that are pushing for Brexit really are anti-Christian, in fact, in their understanding. Many people despair and have been driven to real despair over Brexit. Suicide suicide rates are up, and there's serious despair over this matter, which I think it's the duty of politicians and monarchs to pay attention to the mental health of the nation, the spiritual health. The Liberal Democrats, have just sponsored a huge rise in funding for mental health, especially for children, and other parties need to do the same. So, in what possible universe could it be said that Christianity would endorse this self-destruction of a nation and its self-impoverishment, its self-harm, essentially? The question, therefore, we have to ask is what light can be shed on all these complex issues from the perspective of Christian theology? Okay, there's an accumulated wisdom in Christian theology which is centuries old. It's 2,000 years old. Matthew and the early gospel writers were the beginning of that, following Christ's revelatory teachings. And then, the generations of the early fathers of the church and the early Gnostics and all the people that had either met Jesus or knew someone who met him. There was St. Paul, who, although he never met him, he kind of tuned into him and met him psychically. And so all of that needs to be studied and understood and taken on board. And that's what theologians do or try to do. It's what I've tried to do in my studies over the years and my teaching. I taught Christianity in schools as head of religious studies and in lectures at the University of London and Oxford. And I've done a lot of work on commentaries on the Gospels. So, given all that, and I'm someone that's looked at Christianity from all lenses, trying to get back as much as possible to the source, to Christ himself, what he taught. And the first generation of people like the early Gospel writers, the first Gnostics, Mary Magdalene, Thomas, Matthew, etc., St. John. And then looking at the later early fathers and some of the early writings that have survived. But what interests me, and then later the churches take form and structure. In Rome, the Catholic Church, in Byzantium, the Orthodox Church, in Ethiopia, in Egypt, and in Britain, what I call the Druid Christian Church. It was an amalgamation of early native Celtic wisdom with Christian wisdom. And it was developed by the great saints, St. Albans and St. Columba in Ireland and St. Aidan in Lindisfarne and so on. So if you look at all that, what light would that show on the Brexit phenomena? Well, the accumulated wisdom of Christian philosophy and theology over many centuries means that, in a sense, Christians have an active duty, as I believe, to campaign for the realisation of the kingdom of God here on earth, and not merely in heaven. You see, in the Lord's Prayer given by Matthew, thy kingdom come on earth, our Father in heaven, thy name be hallowed, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. So it's not just let's kind of be good and then we go to heaven when we die. It's let's do the will of God here so that the kingdom of God will come on earth as it is in heaven. How do we do the will of God? Well, God is the absolute universal behind all things, behind all religions, all of us, all teachers, all, everyone you love, every animal, every blade of grass, every tree. God is the pantheos in which the universe inheres. As Aristotle said, it's the unmoved mover through which the universe is moving at tremendous speeds. So God is the unmoved mover who loves everything, right? And that universality of perspective can shine into us and through us and transform this world. This planet is in the kingdom of God. We just have to realise it and awaken to that. That, I think, is what Christ had seen in his enlightenment. And that's what he was trying to share with his students. So we have to start, as Christian thinkers and theologians, we have to start from that. The possibility of enlightenment. The possibility of enlightenment in body. Christianity isn't about enlightenment after death. It's about embodiment of enlightenment. This is why sexuality and marriage are sacraments of Christianity. To love your spouse, is an act of re-sacralization of the world, if you want. So, so I think this is the ethic that's implicit in the Christian message, to re-divinize the kingdom of heaven here on earth. So we have to judge political structures according to how well they do that. That's the ethic we have to apply, the test. Nazi Germany failed the test. It was persecuting, abusing. It was a destructive, vicious, violent, interlude in otherwise mainstream liberal democrat, social democrat, German and European politics. Racism as always leaves a nasty sting in its tail. So we have to ask, is the UK, United Kingdom, Great Britain, and Northern Ireland, does that pass the test? Is that a moral agency in world history? I'd like to think so. I hope so. There have been some very good people who've lived in Britain and taught there and studied there, and I've met quite a few of them in my lifetime. But in the centuries before me, it's an island of saints going right back to the earliest traditions of Christianity and the Druids. It's an island where that universality can shine through. Therefore, breaking up the United Kingdom with its freedom of religion and so on, it seems to me as a wrecking act of a total anarchist, which is what Dominic Cummings is, and Steve Bannon and Nigel Farage, the other people behind the kind of so-called brains behind Brexit, are all wreckers. They haven't got that spirit of love for the whole that St Matthew and the Christian Universalists have. They are particularists who want to emphasise racial superiority, this exceptionalism argument, which has been re-imported from America back into UK circles, and it's been promoted by the wealthy people that own the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, who don't pay a single penny of tax in the UK. They're propaganda machines for the elites, who really are antithetical to ordinary, decent, loving, striving, caring people up and down the UK and the rest of Europe. So we have a duty, and this is why many Christians have worked actively in politics as democratic constitutionalists over the centuries, They've taken part in debates, they've become MPs, they've become lords, they've served as monarchs, whatever level of society you're born into, and academics and so on. And they are doing their best, these statesmen and women, to advance that kingdom of God on in our country and in our continent. And I think the founders of the European Union were in that lineage. They were people, John Monnet and the others, were striving to ground that ideal of the kingdom of God into the European policy of nations. So they said, why don't we have a coming together of these nations, which can no longer fight right from the beginning. The peace thing is the crucial thing, and they can trade. Citizens can travel to each other's country. They can do tourism. They can do everything that people do: meet and fall in love and go and have families in each other's countries. They can build a kingdom of God in Europe. And that, I think, is the vision of the founders of the European Union, which I 100% support. And I think they were inspired by their Christian faith. And to say they weren't and that they're all devil worshippers is just a moral and intellectual error of the worst possible order. And it just betrays the ignorance of the kind of people that say that. They're using it for propaganda. So many of the greatest statesmen and women have been inspired in European history by their vision of the Christian faith. I'm surrounded here by the tombs of saints and the living memory of deep thinkers in France here, having sat at the feet of many great saints in the British Isles for many years. Christ never advocated keeping quiet and shutting up when wrong is happening all around us. He instead insisted we have a duty to speak out and be counted. That was his moral courage and his stubbornness as a teacher. It's what I would argue that all the Christian clergy of Britain should be doing. Because Christianity is bigger than just the UK. Christianity belongs to humanity, and it belongs to Europe as a whole. It's not a prerogative, it's not owned by UK Inc. or PLC. The UK is part of that family of Christian nations, along with Holland and France and Germany and Spain and Italy and Greece and all the others. And we need to take our place in humility amongst and with them all. So many people in Britain are puzzled and worried and concerned about Brexit. They're trying to think through the moral challenges and difficulties it raises. And I think if you look at it from the Christian perspective, and if you talk to your vicars and so on, and if you say, well, whose side should people of faith be on? Should we even take sides? Should we be rather indifferent or apathetic? I think the answer is no. We should actually take sides here. That's why I've come out so strongly for Bremain. I've looked at it, and the negativity that arises out of Brexit far outweighs any possible gain. If I'm a doctor, which I am, of social healing, and I'm shown a body politic that wants to dismember itself and cause tremendous suffering and pain, no, that's like a patient. You don't cut up the patient, you heal them, which means you bring them together in the light of wholeness. So Kant argued, a great Christian philosopher, that we should listen to the voice of our moral reason, that it's implanted in each of us by the divine intelligence that underpins the universe. And then we have a duty to enact its ordinances. So it's not optional. We have a moral duty to follow the path that conscience dictates. That's why I'm teaching and speaking out, and why I'm offering this talk to the Christian clergy of Britain particularly. Because if I don't speak out and I don't follow my conscience, I'm just a, flotsam and jetsam. I have no substance, I have no weight. All my training in my life as a teacher and as a scholar, as a Kantian of sorts, ensures that we should speak out. Other ethical thinkers, like the liberal utilitarian tradition of European intellectual life, argue we have a duty to enact political actions that ensure the increasing happiness of the greatest number of people. And Helvetius and Bentham and others and John Stuart Mill took this idea, which became influential. And I agree also with that. Happiness was the key benchmark that Aristotle put for his teachings about virtue ethics. Virtue brings happiness in the end. And so virtue ethics is as Alistair MacIntyre said, it's the path that brings maximum happiness. Nothing else satisfies the human soul. Brexit is like a drug. You want more of it. It's a fake drug. It's a synthetic, cocaine substitute or some kind of ersatz thing. It will never bring peace. It will never bring satisfaction to the soul because it's based on lack of virtue and lack of intelligence. And so we have to reject it and embrace true happiness, because you might get a little buzz or a kick. I mean, some people who are into Brexit get a kick from annoying people. They get a kick from being so contra. It's a kind of punk type thing in the British characters to go for the opposite of what common sense says. So, hey, what? I'll stick a razor blade, in my nose or whatever. It's a punk thing, this Brexit. But even the punks have realised it's absolutely catastrophe. Genuine punks have moved on from that, because it's just mind-boggling to self-destruct and self-abuse. So true happiness, as Aristotle said, comes from virtue, not from its opposite. The opposite path brings a buzz, a kick, but it fades and leaves a sting in its tail. True virtue brings lasting happiness. And Bremain is the path of virtue on this difficult, complex equation, if you work it out, in which the maximum happiness can be done. Because if you just work it out in a purely numerical terms, as I've done, Brexit is going to bring catastrophe for the vast, vast majority of people of the UK and also for Europe, actually, and elsewhere in the world. So just in purely utilitarian terms, it's a disaster. Whereas Bremain brings happiness for the vast majority of people in the UK and in Europe. And that's what Christ also taught. He taught the path of happiness. It's as if, he'd been reading his Aristotle. And for all we know, he had dabbled a bit in Aristotle if he was in the library in Alexandria. We know that Herod Antipas and Herod the Great studied a bit of Aristotle. So maybe Jesus, had got a bit too. So how blessed, how happy are those who know their need for God, is the first teaching from Matthew. I love that, because it's like saying you can't begin the path of happiness unless you realise that you need to find God in order to achieve it. God being the universal perspective, the unmoved mover, the divine love that underpins everything. If we are puffed up and we think, well, I know everything, I know, Brexit's the best thing, I'm a believer, or whatever, some thing that one latches onto, like a cult, it seems to me Brexit is an absolute death cult, then you have no room in you for humility or for learning. Like Christ said, it's just like, old wineskins. There's no room in them for new wine. And how blessed, how happy will be the sorrowful, for they shall find consolation. Again, if you understand the dark, if you're prepared to look at the shadow, if you're prepared to look at grief, pain, if you're prepared to realise the pain and the grief that Brexit is causing and has caused and will cause, then you're loving God with all your mind, because you're looking at truth. People that are shallow Brexiteers don't want to even think about this. They don't want to even be challenged on this. But Christ insists that we have to look at the sorrow. Only by doing that will we find release and rest and happiness at the end of the day. Happiness isn't a shallow thing. It's not a sort of quick fix, kind of heroin buzz. It's looking at the grief and not taking the heroin and taking the path of virtue. How blessed are those of a gentle spirit, or meek, is how it's translated. For they shall have the earth for their possession. How blessed are the people of gentleness, of kindness, of tact, of politeness. In the debates I've been listening to, the Brexiteers have been trumpeting violently their views in the face of all reason, in the face of common sense, and yet getting away with it. And being extremely rude and impolite, it seems to me, constantly. And I think it's been shocking, the kind of level of rudeness. And that has now even gone to the point where Boris Johnson goes and lies to the Queen. The man is extremely rude. And now he's being rude to the Queen by lying to her. I hope the Supreme Court see through the rudeness, and that the British people I know and love, who are humble and of a gentle spirit, can reclaim their country for Bremain. And then, how happy are the peacemakers? God shall call them his children. This sums it up to me, is that's the fundamental purpose of our work here on this planet. It's why I run a peace institute, it's why I run an order of Druids of peace, it's why I was on the board of the Anglican Peace Fellowship for many years. I've sat on many boards of conferences. It's why I'm running a conference in Delhi with colleagues from the Jain community. I'm just an academic advisor, but I'm helping them in December. It's why I'm off to Germany tomorrow, to Lindau, to chair a conference meeting thinkers and talking about the World Intellectual Forum as another vehicle for peace. All this is designed so that we can find a way of fulfilling this. How blessed, how happy will be the peacemakers. God will call them his children. And that's another wonderful quote from Matthew. So that to me is the path. Christ was teaching the path to happiness. I won't go into all of them. You can read it yourself if you haven't. And it's what Aristotle was teaching. It's what Kant and the utilitarian philosophers were teaching. So if we look at all these philosophical paths and moral teachings, and it's really what Buddha was teaching. I mean, this is an interfaith crisis. It's not just for Christians, although I'm focusing these talks mainly aimed at Christians, but the implications of Brexit are horrendous for all faiths. I'll come back to that in a minute. So anyway, really what I'm saying, I'm announcing today on St Matthew's Day, I'm willing to come and teach this course in any parish in the UK, if there's sufficient interest. I'd love to come and do a tour and speak in parish halls and churches. I intend to teach this course on each of the Saints' Day. That's St Mark's Day, April the 25th, St Luke's Day, the 18th of October, which is when there's a big march happening in London, St John's Day, which is 27th of December, and St Thomas's Day, which is July the 3rd in the Universal Church, and then St Mary Magdalene's Day, July 22nd. I'm going to be reflecting on this whole crisis from a Christian perspective on each of those days, and I'd like to aim mainly at the Universal Church, by which I mean Catholics as well as Protestants, as well as Gnostics, as well as Anglicans and Presbyterians and Quakers and New Age Christians and Druid Christians and pagan Christians. There's a whole bubbling awayness about Christianity. I mean, I have books about American Indian Christians and people like Sequoyah, who reconciled American Indian primal religion with Christianity, a man I greatly respect. So these blue boxes are all the different types of Christians, Rosicrucian, the whole lot. And then down here you have all the different orders of the church, Dominicans and so on. And so all of them, I think, have a common interest a common duty, let me put it, at ensuring the happiness